please have the floor. Of course, there are a lot of issues that were, raised, but this trajectory point, of course, the country is going into the direction of the important pillar of the private sector. Of course, that there was a meeting between us and the Federation of Egyptian Industries to look into the problems and the stumbling blocks of that really hinder the industrial sector, as my colleague said. As to the scenarios of economy, we have defined 7 sectors that should be prioritized, or that should be that the choice was not random for these sectors. We had certain criteria, like the linkages, like the added value, like the potential of creating job opportunities, of networking and linkages, the developmental access of the future. So we're not looking, we're not looking at this point on, we are just also projecting to the future. There are certain criteria and indexes that are very objective and very standardized. Also, there is a plan of action that we are working on. I want to assert that it's not only a plan of action. No, it's not only among ministers, but we'll have partners from the private sector. And this is the mindset, and this is the orientation that we are going and moving in the direction of, which is collaboration among all the ministries. Yeah, I know. At certain points, there might have been some confusion or sort of the things. But again, we are one government. We should sit together. We should have the same mindset, and we should have assignments for each and every ministry. And then there must be some networking and linkage among these ministers, because reconciling the policies and decision making is very important. And the private sector, again, we had this in the private sector aspect, where the Federation of the Union of Egyptian Federation went into discussions with the Ministries of Trade, the Ministries of Industry, in order to see how can we achieve all these objectives, and how can we move on in the right trajectory in order to reach our objectives of improvement in these pioneering sectors like industry sector. As to the explosion, population explosion, Egypt, we always say we are different, and this is a different, again, a reverse demographic changes, which means that the population development went down in the 90s, where Dr. Mahran was, in charge, and there was an orientation of the state to decrease. But what happened is that if you look into the graph, this all changed. This, of course, caused problems. Economists, that any increase in the rate of population means the reduction in the economic development. Government, with all its ministers involved, especially the Ministry of Planning. Ministry of Planning, they always look from an angle of a helicopter view, which is, a bit higher view. But one of the problems that we can see is the population problem. Even in the global report that was presented in New York, we put forward, and we concentrated on the population explosion and the increase in the population rate. There should be, actually there will be certain policies to deal with this increasing rate of population. I think that the only thing that I should mention now concerning the debts, well, if we look in this point. Yeah, maybe the rates are accepted globally, but there are certain challenges still. Consider that the exchange, for example, rate increased. This might lead to a lot of the size and the volume of debts. These scenarios should be closely observed. We should also link the load to development. We don't take loans just for nothing. There should be a certain criteria for the internal and external loans, putting into consideration, of course, the private sector. Dr. Abla, would you like to comment? Dr. Abla, there are certain points, please. Are you going to open the floor for the discussion? So I have certain quick points. I think that the political will would be handled by the Prime Minister and the Cabinet. We need transparency. What are the procedures? Who is going to follow up? Who is going to do what? We need all that. And the point of the external or the debts and its management, I think that the debts in Egypt is a very, very important and serious problem in Egypt, especially the external loans. And I think that even the foreign institutions cannot feel it. At the very end, we know it, and we are in a close position to see how serious it is. The problem is that we are speaking about how to settle the debts, but in separation of the economy. That's not the point. That's not the point, how to settle the debts. Handling the debts should also tackle certain points like is there any return and all these things. So the point is that we're putting the cart before the horse. Sometimes we are, asking for money without really pushing what are the projects to be put into that money. Dr. Jan, also you mentioned something about the limit and a lot of things, and it's requested from the Parliament that they should ask that the budget deficit that when the budget deficit in all countries in the world, when it exceeds certain limit, it stops. And then it gets back to the Parliament so that the Parliament would stop this deficit. So sometimes some projects would not be implemented. This is very important also. There is another point about the governmental deficit. We used to use and study and teach that it's a fiscal tool which is used by the state to make objectives. But now it's becoming a target, the deficit. I mean, what's important is what is achieved through it, and this is the circle, the terrifying circle. If the deficit of the government went down, it's because the subsidies were down, but we needed to decrease it in a way that the expenses of the government itself should come down, and then this all pour in the institutional reform. As to the transformative industries, I always have a problem in this point. When we speak about the transformative industry, there are a lot of industries subdivisions, and each subdivision has a chain value, and each one has a certain characteristics. I think we need to get more into that, to study it more. The AINSHAM and the Federation of Egyptian Industries should look into, and think they are doing that in the value chain, so that they would quite know the investment opportunities and how much needs foreign investment and how much investment for the small companies. So this part of the value chain is missing, and that's important according to the 2030 SDG. Tourism, for example, also there's another point here. In the ECES, we had a good lengthy in-depth study about tourism, out of which we've got a roadmap to reform the whole sector, and we handed this to Her Excellency the Minister of Tourism and the Committee of Tourism in Parliament, and we gave it to you, Dr. Jean. And I think if we really put into consideration all the ways of how can we reach these objectives with the background of the experts is very important. As you asked about the methodology and you want to know the quality of the numbers, we don't have a lot about methodology to control. The questions come from them, and some, at certain times, an independent entity puts the question, but then we discover that certain countries, certain companies, were not involved. So we had an internal unit to do this, and we explained to the companies the meanings of the question, because back ago the questions were very ambiguous and very general. So if you ask someone in agriculture about something else, he would, say some nonsense. It means nothing to him. So now, what I want to make sure out of all this, and that's important, is that we have to concentrate on a certain number and to improve this number. That was the good experience in Morocco, because they had a certain committee which was empowered to change certain things. As to the number was only a guide. Because reality, as I said, can be very different. And one of the problems in the countries, and even in Egypt, that we feel very excited that we improved on papers, but we didn't actually. And also the size of the market is related to the population, and therefore the purchasing power is not that big. So, but the size of the market is calculated to be very scaled up or very extensive, and that's again another point that we should look into. I'm not sure of what you said about a purchasing power that is limited. You gave an impression that you're not concerned about the internal debt. I think the internal debt is very important. I think it represents a burden. We're going to open the floor for questions, but only the name, and please introduce oneself and the question.
Dr. Biltagi. Microphone, please. Microphone, please. I have two questions or two comments to make. One is related to what was mentioned by Dr. Tawfi, that we have to be directed towards a scientific revolution that is taking place globally, to look into knowledge economy and enter into that. All this is related to education. I cannot at all to have education institutions and scientific research to be lagging behind. All I hope for is to have knowledge economy. Also, the pharaohs, whatever they did, they were based on knowledge. All that is different from what is taking place now as compared to the pharaohs is that the turnover is very big. The new technologies, the new creations and innovations, and its application in the labs, and theoretically assimilation and application cannot be denied. It can last for 6 months. In the past, it lasted for 3 or 4 years for application. The matter is in the hands directly of the government. Thanks to Dr. Jehan, Dr. Ahmed. I'm astonished and dismayed. The agriculture sector has not been mentioned. You speak of tourism and industry for definitely, and tourism, but I am quite surprised that when we have 50% of our population in Egypt depend in their income on agriculture. We have 36% of the population working in the agriculture field every day. That is a sector that has to be totally upgraded. We have smart agriculture based on artificial intelligence, on sensors, on drones, measuring the quantity of water and the nutrients. And at the same time, the return from the sector, agricultural sector, is very high for that country if we are careful. Now, exports, Dr. Arif knows this, we have $4 billion at least coming from agricultural products that is processed and the fresh products that is exported. I'm quite surprised, and I want to convey this message to you and to the Prime Minister, because this is quite disturbing, because those people, what are we going to do with them? Thank you. Dr. Hayam Saleh has to leave, and we will take the questions directed to her first. Any questions to Dr. Jihan? How do we develop experience? Different forms that should be improved. Perhaps the 2030 program or agenda would solve problems. Every ministry, regardless of the people working in them, they have KPIs to cover everything, and each will be measured, and the awards are headed towards destruction. What is the problem? We have a problem to solve the whole thing, KPI 2030, and until we get there, what are the entities, not the individuals? It's provoking. Take the questions directed to Dr. Jihan first. I have a problem in the idea of the domestic and foreign debts. Dr. Ahmed said something, and it's contrary. He said the policy of the government and the ceiling of debts and the rate of exchange. I'm sure this will affect the ceiling. It could be higher or lower. And this is at the global level. The ceiling also could be affected by the GDP. It will be actually impacted if you have a drop in revenue. You will have to find other policies. It is supposed, and the only orientation at the present condition is to receive loans or not to receive loans at all. And indebtedness should be directed to investment that will have a return and will cover the payment of debts. Amal Meher. Good morning. As a matter of fact, first of all, I agree with Dr. Hani Beitofi. The statement of the government, I think that we have reversed in competitiveness according to documented information. We had great hope with Egypt's Vision 2030. There was a plan that was clear for every ministry. The minister changes or not, the same policy continues. But after the change of the Ministry of Planning was that we are reviewing 2030. I actually do not know what are the criteria for indebtedness and the debts. There was a plan that I depended on, and they want to change it, and I do not know how to change it. Can you please clarify this? Also, there are no tools or mechanisms for follow-up and assessment. Accordingly, I have a minister, I remove a minister, I have a new one, I have a project, I change a project, and I do not declare. I visited Sri Lanka last month. The Prime Minister and the head of the Parliament, the Speaker of the Parliament, inaugurated a conference for follow-up and assessment prepared by the government. Where do we stand from such? Until today, the mechanisms are not declared at all. The planning tools for social contribution after the plan of 2030 that was made on a social and communal level, it doesn't exist anymore. Whereas for the competitiveness and the efficiency does not exist. I believe that I don't know what the reason. What are the circles that rule and dominate selections and choices? There should be a framework that is clear according to orientations. Nothing. We will not say that it will be the efficiency of the selection of ministers or the selection of posts. I believe I see people that are efficient in their posts, and they are going backwards, and they do not notice how they affect our indicators. I do not know. Perhaps there are tools for assessment that are different from us. We want to change information about those tools. Thank you. Thank you. I will answer to the questions, and Dr. Ahmed will continue, because there are a lot of things that should be responded to by the Ministry of Planning. As for agriculture, as I spoke, I did not relate to many points, and agriculture existed part of the industry and part of the exports. Agriculture has taken into consideration through the executive plan, not only through the sectors that I have mentioned, but when I spoke, it was according to a study that was done for the Egyptian economy and the potential, as Dr. said, for the interlinkages that exist. And what we found, or was clear, the 3 points we have: agriculture, industries, all the sectors. I was just responding to a point related to tourism and industry. For sure, agriculture exists. Maybe I was not clear. As for the debts, and the question related to the debt, as Dr. Abla has said, the debt is related to the economy. And hence, when I speak of domestic or foreign debt that I receive, and what do I do with that? The plan for the debt, Dr. Main, there is an extensive plan that is clear and frank related to the repayment of debts and dealing with the deficit in the different parts and its effect on the different factors, including the percentages from the GDP and the means. Everything is very clear. I rest assured that all those points have been taken into consideration, and the scenario was taken into consideration and was submitted to the President by the Economic Group. And at the present time, we are having an executive plan that would be clear to all the society and to that the economy is quite clear. That is our road. That is the way we are pursuing, not only its effect on economy. As Dr. Alba said, it is a tool to finance projects, and the return of those projects are very important. And the extra debts, that how does it impact? Before I enter into the debts, I'll be able to cover it as the 2030 plan. Dr. Ahmed, the Ministry of Planning has done this. I know the plan from Dr. Ashraf Al-Arabi, and the work that we have undertaken were consistent. The government at large with the 2030 agenda and the vision for 2022 to the next 5 years is in consistency with 2030 and the government program. The tools of the plan, how to deal with it, is the responsibility of Dr. Ahmed. He can speak about this. The structure of the different ministries and the KPI, all these include the administrative reform related to the Ministry of Planning. Before I leave, I wanted to respond to the points that I can mention. I apologize. I would have liked to continue, but as a matter of fact, I have to leave right now. And thank you.
Lots of thanks, Dr. Jihan.